say hello and welcome on behalf of Mark and I. We're glad you're here. We don't want to do a big introduction, but it might be helpful to know a little bit about us. I am Scott Tayler. I'm the new Director of Congregational Life, which has a role of overseeing and supporting all of our field staff across the country. My background, I'm looking at my gang, so to speak, in this corner. I was the co-senior minister at the First Unitarian Church in Rochester, and also the lead minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Canandaigua, which are two congregations that over the last discussions began about 4 years ago, but just in the past, 5 years ago, in the past 4 years, yoked into a yoked relationship of having a multi-site. So that's my background. I will say that in many ways, welcome. One of the things that makes me jazzed about this multi-site model is not just that I got to work with two groups of awesome folks who are here, but also if you were at the meetings, the district meetings, the business meetings, you heard me talk about our staff, and I talked about how Priscilla really talked about moving from independence to interdependence. And in many ways, I love all the congregations that I've served, but it was only the last 5 years of my ministry where I served a yoked situation that I really started to feel like I was serving a Unitarian Universalist congregation. A situation where it was really had an organizational system that reflected our theology in some way. So that's where my passion comes from. My excitement is also working along with colleagues in the Congregational Life staff, Mark, and I'll let him introduce himself. And then Mark's going to leap into going over, we're going to talk about the models, different models of multi-site. Mark will do most of that presentation, and I'm going to try to get into the rationale of multi-site, some of the reasons behind it, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So welcome, everybody. So Mark,
I'm Mark Bernstein. I'm the Growth Development Consultant for CERG. I don't have a gang here. I left them back in Philadelphia, where I'm from. My home congregation is the UUA Church of Delaware County in Media, Pennsylvania. And I'm always happy to come out this way, especially for the joint OMB SLD District Assembly.
And so, welcome, no problem. So again, what we're trying to do today is do a basic overview, and we'll try to tailor it. It was very helpful to kind of know your particular interests, so we can tailor it in our discussion and try to answer how we apply this general to your specific questions in a little bit. Now, for some of you who are in multi-sites, this is going to be a review, but for those of you who aren't, again, this is the 20,000-foot picture. So when we're asking about what is multi-site, this is the basics. So basically, the simple concept of one congregation in multiple locations. All of these have little asterisks by them in a way, because in a UU setting, what we're finding in other religious settings, it's one congregation in multiple locations. What we're finding in UU settings, it also can be multiple congregations in a network. So sort of one network in multiple. And I think with our congregational polity, that's going to be a model that we're going to be interested in exploring. Not to mean that we won't explore mergers and more traditional multi-sites, but that asterisk should be there. In many cases, multi-site has always been shared mission and shared DNA. This, I would highlight, does not necessarily mean, as you'll see in a second, shared boards or shared budgets. It can, but it doesn't have to. But this is one of the ways that you bond with one or with 2, 3, 4 congregations. The other component is shared staffing. And to really qualify as a multi-site, we're talking about shared program staffing. There's a lot of experiments going on that the field staff are working with many congregations to share support staff. Think about your office staff, your bookkeeping staff, your technology staff. I think those are resource sharing models that are very exciting and will help us grow stronger, but that's very different than taking it at the program level of sharing program staff and having a program team serve 2, 3, 4 congregations at the same time. Then the other one, obvious one, is then shared programming. Key to being on the same mission and having the same DNA is shared programming. So obviously pieces of that are sharing ministers, if It's a team of ministers going around and sharing the same sermons, but the bigger piece for those of you who've done small group ministry, that kind of shared programming, and certainly sharing RE programming at the same time, to have that kind of shared programming to create economies of scale, but also a sense of shared identity. And again, in many cases, there's often one board and one budget, but not always. And that's something I think when we as Unitarian Universalists are trying to embody this model, and in some ways take it from what evangelicals have done and also Catholics have done. Those are the two, really the pioneers, for very different reasons. Evangelicals because of growth and reaching out, Catholics because of economic reasons and trying to be more efficient. They have merged, one board, one budget. Again, I think as we embody that in Unitarian Universalism, we're going to see openness to that, but often we'll probably qualify that with congregations keeping their own board and their own budget. So that's not an impediment to doing this model. So in a second, we'll get more into the depth of the why of multi-site. We thought it'd be good just to start to give you some pictures. What do multi-sites look like? So you can have some pictures of them in your head, and then we'll get into rationale and why.
This is a quick overview of 4 models under the multi-site umbrella. Just for those of you that aren't aware of the scope, just so you have a visual image, and then when Scott talks more about the benefits and goes into more detail, you'll have a sense of what we're talking about. This is new ground, folks. This is looking at doing business in a whole different way. It's exciting, it's scary as hell, but it's also really, really exciting. So there are 4 models. The first one is the branch model. The distinctive characteristics, as Scott talked earlier, most of these have one board, one budget, one mission, and one staff team, so it's shared resources. In a branch model, there's a mother church, the big church that gives birth to little baby churches. And in the branch model, the branches are supported heavily by the mother church through the material, so it might be material for small group ministry, it might be adult faith development material that they provide, and then they also provide sermons. So they could, and the one example I'll show you in a moment, they provide it electronically, where they may download or upload a sermon to a website, and then the branch downloads the sermon, and then they watch it, and they can watch it on the same day, or they put it up on the internet, or they make a DVD of it and send it to the branch so that the next Sunday, the people in the branch will watch that sermon.
And Mark, if I could jump in here, when you see these, Mark and I tried to highlight the black, or the bold pieces that make it this model more distinctive. And when you see shared material, that's important to distinguish between actual staff. So you see there, that's a model in which one church would be providing material to support versus one staff sharing, being at all the different locations.
And that's the real distinctive characteristic of the branch model, that the staff, particularly ministers, don't go out to the branches necessarily, but they provide that resource material from a distance. And then it's up to the members of the branch to do a worship service or provide other activities, but it does rely on really strong volunteers and lay leaders. The example of the branch model is the congregation in Albuquerque, which has been doing this for a while now. They have 3 branches, Carlsbad, East Mountain, and Socorro, which are, from what I understand, pretty far away from the church in Albuquerque. So otherwise, these people would not have access to a spiritual community, but primarily electronically, they're able to connect with the church in Albuquerque. This is also known as a satellite, but we prefer to use the term branch. I think it's a better visualization. That's the first model. The second model is the campus model. It's similar to the branch model, but there is one major difference. Again, there's one board, one budget, one mission, one staff team. There's a big mother church that gives birth to little baby churches, and I mean that in an affectionate way. I don't mean like baby.
Nothing wrong with babies.
I used to be one myself. The campus model is distinct because there are ministers that go out to the other campuses. So a congregation may have lay-led services maybe twice a month, and then they'll have a minister that will come in twice a month. That will rotate around the various campuses. They are full-service churches. Again, unlike the branch model where there's more limited services, in the campus model, each campus gets full programming. So they do their own RE, they have a lot of social justice work, they do small group ministry, but they're under the auspices of the mother church. And this is, Peter Morales talks about cross borders, the idea of expanding our outreach to those who otherwise would not become Unitarian Universalists. And this is really the best example of how we're able to do that. The example, there are 3 examples of the campus model. The First Unitarian Universalist Church of San Diego has one campus in Chula Vista, and it's the campus, it's called the Unitarian Universalists of the South Bay. It's a full-service congregation, but it's under the auspices of the First UU Church of San Diego.
And Spanish-speaking.
Yeah, multilingual services, but they have full services every week. Another example is the Jefferson Unitarian Church in Golden, Colorado. They have a campus in Evergreen, Colorado, and they call it the Evergreen Campus. Again, it's a full-service church. They have religious education. They'll have rotating ministers that will come through. Quick question, Peggy?
I wasn't sure if by full service you meant full Sunday morning service? Or
Sunday morning service, religious education for children and adults. They have social justice, social action in the community. They have activities that go on during the week, as opposed to the branch model where it might be that a group comes together and sits in a semicircle and watches a sermon and then talks about the sermon afterwards, which is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't have the same kind of services that one would have under the campus model.
And if we had more time, one of the unique things that might be to highlight about the Jefferson model is, while it's full service, Jefferson's starting sort of smaller bite size. So even though it's full service, Evergreen doesn't hold their services every single weekend. They're building towards that, that's the goal. But they're moving, I think it's twice a month right now. But so there's little qualifiers we could get into more, but it shows that they're also using flexible models and evolving into the ultimate.
You know, sometimes there are subtle differences among these models and nothing's set in stone. So this is an evolving system. The third example is the church in Harrisburg, which started in the suburb of Harrisburg. A few years ago, they bought a church in downtown Harrisburg, renovated it, and now they have 2 worship services, one on the suburban campus and one on the urban campus. They have religious education in both. The choir takes turns, alternating each month, singing in each of the 2 campuses.
Would the choir contain people from both congregations?
The choir consists, I believe it consists of people from both congregations,
Yes.
and they go back and forth. The third model is the merger model. Again, the characteristics similar to the first 2, one board, one budget, one mission, shared staffing, one staff team, but then it does, with the merger model, the model begins to change. This generally involves 2 existing congregations, where the first 2 models, there was a church and they created little baby churches. In the merger model, you tend to have 2 existing congregations that, or more, but for simplicity's sake, 2 existing congregations that come together. One might be the adopting church, the larger of the 2, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's a strong sense of alignment and common identity. And the best example of that is the First Unitarian in Houston. So these were separate churches that merged with First Unitarian Houston and took on the name First Unitarian Houston. So there's a common identity among churches that merge together. And again, one board, one staff, one mission, similar to the other models.
How old were these other churches?
I'm sorry?
How old were the other churches?
I don't know, Deb. Does anyone know?
They range, I mean, but in 15 to 30, I mean, over 15 years each. They weren't newly formed churches.
Yeah, Thoreau dated from like the 70s, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, maybe not like 100 years, but I think we're looking.
It was quite old.
But again, the major difference with the merger, and then you'll see with the yoke, is that these were congregations that were already in existence, that merged with another congregation. In this case, they merged with a larger one in order to share resources and become stronger.
And so you're saying that the Thoreau Stafford campus still exists and the Museum District campus still exists?
Yes.
And so all the campuses still exist, but they call themselves First Unitarian Houston?
Yes.
Okay,
And they're
gotcha.
starting to work on a different, right?
Yeah.
They're even thinking about the name.
Yeah, gotcha.
So you can see the risk that these congregations are taking.
Yeah.
They're giving up their identity. I mean,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of risk involved in all of this.
Yeah.
The last model is the yoke model.
Yeah, and before you pass the slide, before you do the other slide, just the next slide, for my friends that are here, I put in and I meant it affectionately.
And it's funny, I was going to say, this is Scott's slide. This is Scott's slide. This is the yoke model. So as Scott tells me, you can see that these people look different and they may have different characteristics, but they're both pulling in the same direction, which is really a great analogy for the yoke model. This is where two congregations, existing congregations, come together. Unlike the merger, though, they have separate boards and separate budgets, but they're shared staff and they're shared programming. So they retain their individual identities. So one doesn't blend into the other. They maintain their separate identities, but they begin to share resources. It's kind of, it can be a final step, but it can also be an intermediate step to a merger, where both congregations really take on the same DNA. And the example of that, and we added this piece to show that it can grow toward a common mission once the two congregations start working together. And the example of that would be First U Rochester and Canandaigua, which some of you are intimately familiar with. An example of a yoked congregation, and you might, as we go through our time together, maybe speak to that and how well that's working.
And the one thing about organically, what we're seeing especially in New England, where there are a bunch of congregations really close to each other, the yoked model where you kind of keep your individual identity and grow into that shared mission, versus in other models where there's merger, you kind of have to sign on the dotted line from the get-go, that we're gonna have the same board, same budget, same mission. These models allowed, relationships between congregations where they, again, sorted out how close and how similar do you want your identities to be. So that's the big difference between those.
Also, a quick question about the yoked. Would it be common for these congregations to be similar sized, or would it be a possibility that maybe one's big, one's small?
Yeah, that's the beauty of the yoked model. In the case in our region here with First Unitarian in Canandaigua, First Unitarian is one of our largest churches, the third largest in our movement, and Canandaigua is, how many members? 79. 79 members. And so, it's not dependent on size. It's really, I think in more cases you're gonna see congregations of similar size joining. The reason why I love lifting up, not just because it was a yoked situation I was part of, but the reason I like lifting up that is, even though one church was significantly larger, it really is a partnership from which both are supporting each other and helping each other and bringing gifts to the table. Now that's hard when you have those differences of size, but that's the intent. One quick example would just be staffing, as we'll talk about in a second. First Unitarian would not be able just to replace me, hired people. They would not have had the resources to replace me with I sometimes. It took 3 people to replace me. And a dog. But you wouldn't have those resources unless joining together. So that's one concrete example of how the larger church benefited, but many more.
Why haven't the Methodists or Presbyterians done more with this multi-site?
Oh, they are. They are. I was just trying to lift up Pioneer.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know.
Yeah.
Just the next step would be to look what have other denominations done.
Yeah, that's why I just said really it's the Catholic and the evangelical are really the front runners here, and other denominations have followed them, with the evangelicals really having their models designed because of growth and outreach and overflow, Catholics doing it out of economies of scale, scarcity of resources, how to tap into economies of scale, and the other religions have sort of followed that, which I think we're coming up following that, but we have a unique, how do we do this with our congregational polity? So I think we may be carving out a middle path.
So realistically, in the yoked model, what kind of geographic distance is optimal? Where is the breaking point geographically, being spread apart?
It's yet to be, all this is an experiment, right? All this is an experiment, it's yet to be seen. But, statistics are saying that the latest thing I read is it's kind of down to 20 minutes you're willing to drive. Now, that's averages. Committed members, the thing I read said 35 minutes. But if you invite your friend, they'll come with you for that 35, but the likelihood of them driving on their own if they're more than 20 is far away. So that's the information to pay attention. But again, much of our country, our folks are far away. We have what, 35% of our congregations in the New England area, we can hit 6 with a rock. I mean,
and it really depends on the geography and the community. We have people who drove like 40, 45 minutes.
And then you have people that won't go to the other side of the mountain.
There are people who won't, but in our particular area, people are used to driving half an hour to the grocery store. So you get.
I'm not actually asking about congregants, because I've lived in a lot of places and I've driven a long way to get to church. I'm asking about the staff, and what is it realistic to ask the staff to do in terms of the shared geography?
the conversations I've been a part of, right now we're throwing out 30.
Okay.
Beyond 30, you add stress.
Yeah.
I was very lucky. My house literally was in between the two congregations I served, so it was 13 and a half minutes to one and 19 minutes and 30 seconds to the other. And a couple Sundays to Canandaigua, I got there.
Good one, man. Who was counting?
So a couple more questions, and again, we just want to be able to have, we want to go through some of the rationales to even dig a little deeper, but a couple, maybe one or two more questions just about the general models. Anything?
I think it's just, the kind of the methods of doing this point charge thing, which is that shared staffing, but it's not the shared identity and mission that we're talking about.
Yep. Yep.
And the idea of being able to attract a better candidate if you give a full-time position.
Right, so this is the other thing, the practicalities. The Methodists, now Methodists have a very evangelical strain that we don't always talk about. Those Methodists that have an evangelical strain. It's very interesting, among the evangelical strain, shared DNA, shared mission, one church happens. Well, on the liberal end, it doesn't, and it's much more about efficiencies, economies of scale, being able to, which we'll go into that's why the next thing we talk about will be more focused on economies of scale and more focused on staffing, because Mark and I are feeling that's where some of the wrestling really is happening in our neck of the woods. But it is more that, it's how to hire full-time staff to serve efficiently, or teams serve efficiently in multiple congregations.
I just wanted to get clear on what you meant when you lumped together mission and shared DNA. I assume that by the shared DNA, what you mean is sort of a strategy, a plan for growth and existence.
This is a Scottism, but that distinction has been helpful to me. So for instance, I think at First Unitarian in Canandaigua, if I would have started the conversation and said, we need to sit down, and before we begin, shared mission is essential. Let's sit down and write up a shared mission statement. I probably would have jumped on a job like this years ago, because that would have driven, that would have been a 20-year project, right? So I like to make this distinction between shared DNA and shared mission. This is maybe a poor analogy, but I have my two oldest kids are stepkids. And I can't tell you how many times people say, oh my God, they look so much like you. I'm not sure to see how, but it's because my mannerisms will show up. on their face. And so when you start a relationship with shared staffing, where you're led by and in love with the people who serve you, and you share programming, small groups, and if you're on the same worship themes, suddenly you're kind of doing the same mannerisms, and you start to grow together and be able to share those kind of characteristics. And for me, that's what matters. Someday, we'll see. Maybe there will be discussion about a shared mission statement explicitly, but what matters more to me is people feel like one family.
And that seemed to only be on one of the models, the shared mission and shared DNA. And the other one did not include that, the other ones. Is that true? Or did that go all the way through?
We'd have to go back through them again. It differs. Certainly with the merger model, that's the crucial characteristic.
Right. But not with the yoked.
The yoke model, I think, is the only one where we might still have separate missions.
Okay.
Well, but again, the branches, you don't require mission because it's more of a service provider. It's a mothership helping with material, not requiring you to agree to their mission before you do it.
Oh.
So,
Well, that's true, but
yeah.
the example of Albuquerque, they do have one mission.
Yeah.
That
Slide says
also
one mission.
covers the branches.
Yeah. Yeah. But you wouldn't, again,
Yeah.
it differs.
I'm wondering if, when you talked about there's kind of two major pioneers, two kind of driving why people would want to do this, are there experiences in which both of them are at play, or is it really distinct? The one is about like economic scarcity and we need to survive. Is that the drive, or is it a shared thing with also that sense of evangelical growth and outreach?
So they do overlap significantly. You see a flavor of one in the other. So even when it's overflow, you have an evangelical church that's growing gangbusters and wants to expand. They want to do that in the most efficient way. So when they start another campus, instead of hiring an entirely new staff, they have that staff still serve. So they use, it's like, which is the driving principle and which one is the...
Well, I'm just wondering if there might be conflicts when the driving issue for one congregation is to survive.
Well, and that's...
And the other congregation is to grow.
Right. So this is where I wish we had like a whole day on this, so I have to cut this a little short, but that's why Mark's done such a great job of delineating the different models. If we had more time, we could dig down. But the branches model, right, there's an openness to help us survive. Some of the smaller congregations, you know, we're struggling, we need resources, help us survive. That relationship, you know, feels good. I know in merger models or in yoked models, you know, the reason they're even using that model is, while there might be struggles in both congregations to face a lot of the challenges that, you know, to be able to face the challenges more strongly, there has to be a sense of we're doing this to serve our region better, to bring. And so, you know, we didn't have a 10-year discussion, but we had a good 1.5 discussion, and every dinner I had at my house with the two boards, we made it very clear, this can't just be about like help purely, because the thing won't work. You know, this does have to be expanding our ability to be able to share what we have with our region. So that's where even that economic piece, the driver to be more efficient and use resources more efficiently, has an evangelical, am I allowed to say evangelical? Has an evangelical piece to it as well.
It's win-win.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, win-win, win-win-win. Win-win for the two congregations, and then win for being able to reach the people who haven't met us yet. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let me go through. So so now there's a deeper what. So I want to. Now we're trying to get having pictures of multisite. Mark and I thought it'd be important to try to get your mind into the sort of the why. In a sense, it should be the deeper why. So this isn't just a model or way of organizing. This is a strategy for growth, which we'll go into. So I'm going to go over each of these in detail. But the first one we'll talk about is how this is a strategy for growth. We'll talk about how this is a strategy for staff health and honoring staff strengths. Multisite is. This is a strategy for empowering lay ministry more dynamically than maybe we do as solo churches. And this is a strategy for embodying our theology more than we do as individual churches. So quickly now, and again, if we have more time, we go into all these more detail. This is going to be the cliff notes of all these. So I'm gonna whip through all these, and then we'll take a deep breath, and hopefully have a little time to discuss. Okay? So multi-site allows us to do all 4 of these things, and take a mental look at these, because in your congregation, you know, everybody's going to probably going to be coming at it from these 4 needs or aspirations, so to speak, but you may be stronger in one area or the other. Your rationale may be stronger in one area or the other. So the biggest one has to do with a strategy for growth. Okay, this is the most complicated thing, and this is sort of my story. So what you're seeing here is what I think is a type of way of thinking your way into why we would do multi-site, but this is also exposure to Scott's brain. What you're seeing here is what led me to even introduce the idea and get excited about it. So, as a strategy for growth, before I even thought multi-site, I started with a few assumptions. Number 1, I started with the assumption that sharing our faith is not optional. That whether or not what you do when you reach a certain size is optional, but growing and sharing is not optional. We open our doors and welcome people, and we want to share our faith. We are not pigs. Once we get in and we get something good, we don't just hold on to it, we want to share it. That is what our faith believes. Now, what's optional is, in churches where you grow, you have options after that. You can grow your church even bigger, or multi-site is one where you can grow through adding a building or starting to partner with other buildings. Does that make sense? So that's one assumption that led to multi-site for me. Growth also, the assumption is growth is inevitable. You've heard Peter Morales, my boss now, go off, talk a lot, go off, that's terrible. Sorry about that, Peter, the camera's on. Strongly speak inspirationally about how we are a religion for our time, right? So growth is inevitable, but I would argue if we organize for it. So in other words, selling our religion is not hard anymore. You know, Unitarian Universalism is at every arts theater right now in the movies, right? So there are many people who agree with us, spiritually not religious. But the challenge is to organize in order to be able to grow in my mind. And to grow, I still take seriously, I think most of us do, staffing for growth is key. We won't go into that, but is everybody familiar with staffing for growth? That's not the only thing that makes a church grow, but every organization consultant will say, if you do not take staffing for growth ratios seriously, good luck. You know, and when you look at churches that grow, almost always, it's not the only factor, but it is always present. You are staffed for growth, which usually means a ratio of 1 program staff to 100 versus 1 to 150, which is staffing for maintenance, versus 1 to 200, which is staffing for decline. But staffing for growth is key. And then this has hit me as I looked at myself and at all congregations. Staffing for growth, while it is key, is not something most congregations can do on their own. This seems to me the brutal facts and assumptions of our movement right now. And why is this the case? I'm a preacher's kid. I grew up in the Christian tradition, so I know there are only 4 horses, but I came up with 5 horses, all right? So there are 5 things that are in the face of all of our congregations. Rising healthcare costs. We all are struggling knowing what that's doing to our budgets every year. Rising energy costs. We've all seen that. Luckily it's tailed off a little bit, but we all know what that's like. Building maintenance costs. Whether you're in a giant building where I was at First Unitarian with huge upkeep costs, or you're even in a small building where you're struggling to still pay off your mortgage or do upkeep, this is a major struggle. The other one is our covenantal fair share dues. To be part of a movement and to equally share, this is a challenge for folks. And then also to pay our staff fairly. All of these create the inability to staff for growth. And what I mean by that is that I don't know any, I would say it, I don't think this is hyperbole, I don't know any congregation or movement that can show me a 5-year business plan to handle all 5 of these things. What they can show me is a plan to cheat, to get staffing for growth, right? I don't know any congregation that can handle all of these and keep staffing growth ratios. So what many of us do when you analyze them is we struggle to keep covenant. And the way we get it is we staff for growth, we either break covenant with our congregations by not paying our dues, or we break covenant with those who serve us by not paying fair share. And so in the end, what we end up doing is artificially staffing for growth by asking, in many cases, our staff to overwork, which they often gladly do. So you need 5 staff to be staff for growth, you have 4. But the 4 work because it's so passionate and if you're growing. So this is a situation that we're wrestling with in a lot of cases. Now, I would argue, as I wrestled with this, multisite came into the picture for me. So multisite allows you to share and combine resources, creating economies of scale, okay, eliminating redundancies, which, and I'll go through even the details in a second, which allow us a different and more healthy path to staffing for growth. Now I know I'm going quick here and you're like, well, wait, why are we talking about staffing for growth when this is a multi-site piece? But I really believe they're connected when we're thinking about why is multi-site not just an optional strategy for us, but might be one of the key strategies our movement has to develop if we're serious about growth. And now I'm going to try just to visualize this. And I think this is going to be obvious to you, but I just think it's helpful to get it up here. So our current model, just think about right now. So going back, our current models of siloed ministry. We have 2 ministers delivering 3 or 4 sermons a month, delivered once. Dawned on me when I was at First Unitarian, we had 3 ministers. My wife, the associate, myself, we'd spend 30, if we had to read a book, I don't know how long it takes you to read a book, 20 hours, if a sermon goes bad, there's that. So 30 to 60 hours, 3 ministers, 30 to 60 hours doing that sermon once and putting it on the shelf. And then you look around in my region, and all of a sudden I'm seeing 5 of us doing this, and I'm thinking, that is a poor use of amazing resources. But that's what we do. We have redundancy here. The same thing you can see with religious education. You see 2 religious educators. And this is an example of, like, in 2 congregations. You could do this a whole bunch of different ways, but if you just took 2 congregations and you looked at the redundancy, it becomes blatantly obvious, although I don't know why it hasn't popped for us in neon lights. 2 religious educators, 2 whole different programs, 2 sets of small group materials being independently and separately developed by a whole bunch of people, 2 sets of lay leaders doing governance, budget drives, sitting on committees, doing the same duplicative work, 2 sets of administrators doing same activities with payroll, 2 sets of tech volunteers managing websites and Facebook pages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of it equals redundancy and trapped capacity. You with? I know I'm going fast, folks, but is this okay? Keep moving, you're getting it. So, Capacity Unleashed is just one example. And again, you can get this isn't hard, but there's power in just watching it pop on the screen for me. This is one way of thinking about it. So we move. Multi-site allows us to move from 2 ministers and 6 sermons. Can you all see over here? Am I in your way? Okay, go ahead and move. You know, actually that'd be great, man. Actually, I need to see my cheat sheets because that makes me sound smarter than I am. All right, so we move from, yep, go ahead and keep hitting it. Okay, we go from 2 ministers doing 6 sermons to 2 ministers doing 3 sermons. Hit the next button. Boom! All of a sudden, excess energy, you get this. Now, this is real. I mean, I would say my own experience of, I was able, once I started to do less sermons, I had time to do more. And folks in Canandaigua will, I mean, can you raise your hand that this kind of stuff I worked on when I was down, hired me for a quarter time position, and I was able to do a ton more than other colleagues. All right, next. You can keep hitting again. Same thing in the old model. Goes to 2 DRAs doing 1 Sunday prep, if you were to share it, which allows more time for parent groups, youth work activity, and keep again. Same idea here, 2 governance teams, 2 canvas teams. If when you move to 1 governance group, now this is assuming a merged, but 1 governance group, 1 canvas team frees up more time for what we all talk about with lay leadership capacity. You know, leadership development. How many of us say we really need a leadership development team, and then we can't find people to stay on it or recruit people to do it? Same thing with pastoral care. Okay. And then, let me just look at that. So, again, you're getting this, right? Is it making sense? So, the summary part is it's the same level of staffing producing more programming, 2 ministers producing the output, and again, I don't mean to signal out ministers, I honor religious educators. Also, the idea of professional staff being able to produce the output of 3 or 4. We see, in the case of REs, you can have a situation where 1/3 DREs producing full-time when there's shared work going on. And again, staff for growth without being out of covenant with our UUA, our region, and our staff. And again, this doesn't have to be your rationale. For me, it mattered a lot. Covenant, it matters to us all, being in relationship and being able to handle what I talked about as those 5 horses of the apocalypse. So now let's go real quick to staffing for, that was about growth, remember? So I'm going to really whip through these guys. I'm sorry, but I want us to have time to talk. Staffing is also a strategy for staff health, right? So unleash capacity. Remember those little slides where I said it could allow the minister to do social justice? Well, unleash capacity does not have to result in more work. It can be devoted to a healthy workload. So instead of going from 2 ministers doing 6 sermons to 2 ministers, 3 sermons and all this, you could just let your staff not do these extra 2 and still get the cake. Like, how much icing is there? That's still a lot of icing. You could let the minister and your staff do other things. Right? Imagine that. I know there's ministers in the room, right? So there's also a piece here about if it's evangelical and your professionals are on board, there's a way in which you can use this overflow for growth. There's another way that we can also use it to make our systems kinder to those who give so much to us. Next would be honoring staff strength. I wish I had time to go into this more, but so what we have in our current model, right, with the duplicative services, right, 2 separate congregations, 2 ministers doing all this. Again, I could have brought up RE as well, but this is just simple. What we have in our current siloed system is the myth of the well-rounded minister. And it's the idea that not that you only that you have to do these things, but you have to be good at all these things. And there's another sense in which, when you're in the ministry, and I hope all the lay leaders here know this, there's a huge burden to be under that myth. You have to play not just to your strengths, but your Achilles' heels. I'll say when I served Maine Memorial in Syracuse, that church did get the best of me. Absolutely got the best of me when I was a solo minister. It also got the not so hot part of me, right? When I went to First Unitarian, which was a larger staff team, which that's what we're talking about, multi-site, larger staff teams. But when I went to First Unitarian, all of a sudden, I tell you, my blood pressure is down 10 points. Because on a staff team now, all of a sudden, I could play to my strengths. And at that time, we had Jen Crow, who was an associate minister, and my wife, where they could cover things I didn't do well would be their strengths. So what you have, in a sense, in a multi-site, we have 2 ministers then serving 2 congregations together. You can divide the work up differently, allowing these people to serve to their strengths. Is that making sense? Yeah. So it's another gift. It's another gift that multi-site has. The next one would be a strategy for empowering lay ministry. So again, when you eliminate the administrative and volunteer redundancies, it reduces administration overhead, meaning just less time, frees the laity from ministry, and I would argue gives us in our congregations actual priesthood of all believers, not just committee chairs for all believers. Right? Because the administration is a ministry, and I hate to say it, but the administrative pieces of the church you can't blow off. You have to have volunteers to draw on your board, on your cabinet. You can't do that. And if you trap all that capacity in those meaningful administrative roles, the ability to then really invite people to do priesthood of all believer stuff in lay ministry and small groups is significantly depleted or undermined. You go to the next one. So the other piece that gets you is not just freed laity, but I would argue equipped. So don't forget, as staff have excess time, they can do the social justice, they can do the direct work. I would argue multi-site also gives ministers the chance to be coaches of coaches. Not do the direct work, but start to put a lot more effort into coaching, which they can start to do. Leadership development and volunteer support. You can hit the next one. Oh, whoops. Yeah. So I would tell you, again, equipped and supported leaders are better leaders. Again, not to put down how good of a job we're doing in our churches to equip lay leaders. But again, a multi-site option, when you have capacity freed up, you allow your staff to be able to be coaches and midwives of a stronger, what I would argue, a stronger lay leadership system without having to overwork. I don't argue many of our professionals are doing a great job of coaching, but I bet you they're adding it over and above to their work when they do it. The next one and final one is just a strategy for embodying our theology. I'm a preacher, so this is the one where I wish I could spend 20 minutes on, but Mark told me he'd walk over and kick me if I did. Go to the next one.
He didn't say he would.
This piece here, I could go into it more, but I hope it goes without saying. There's something that's passion, that's to be able to move from these siloed individual congregations we're in to being much more bound together. Even, I would argue, if it didn't produce economies of scale, I would argue makes us more Unitarian Universalists. There's no way, in my view, you can look at a diagram or an org chart of how we organize our congregations and say, that reflects our values. That reeks of our main Unitarian Universalist values. And I think multi-site starts to do that as a unique way of saying, this is a model that represents our theology. And the other piece I want to highlight is it allows us to bring in a new piece of our theology. I really want to give credit to San Diego. How they are a church that's thriving, and they could have totally focused their resources on just being bigger and more with the same. But they said what we want to do with our overflow is we want to become something wider and more and different and get outside of our walls. And so to set up the bilingual campus in a different area of town to reach out and make I love Meg's talk today, make the definition of who us is bigger. It's just really powerful, and also is the thing that multi-site would help us pursue. You can go that for. And so that on the questions part. There we go. Thank you. Whew, all right, so let me shut up. That's a lot. I mean, and Mark and I have talked that we usually do this stuff in like a whole day. So let us pause. Questions about what was up. I think what would be helpful is if I went real quick and got to the first one. So take a second to this one. So remember, this is basically what we did today. These are the rationales that we talked about what multi-site can offer us. So questions, challenges, ways in which it may not fit the unique situation that you're in. Someone would like me to say more? Melissa.
So, one congregation has multiple staff, and nearby congregation has no staff. How then do you, I see the advantages when you're combining staff resources, but when a congregation doesn't have any staff at all, then how do you get to some of these advantages?
Well, in that case, I think that's what gave birth, obviously, to the branches model, like in Albuquerque. Those churches didn't have anything, and so Albuquerque had two options. They could have sacrificed some of what they had. Now, this is going to sound like I don't mean this to be critical, but they could have sacrificed some of the money they had and actually taken staff and put that into staff for those congregations. Or what they did is they just kept the same, but realized we have all these resources that we're only using once. No harm done for us to just share them. You see, so the one piece is you share material resources is the one option I use support. How you get to a bigger model is you have to
Then you have to build it.
Sacrifice. It's sacrifice. I mean, there's no way to be other but blunt. Oh.
Okay, but it's not sacrificing because it's it's investing in the future.
Amen. Better
Because
phrase.
You've got those branches out there. All you're doing is sharing those video sermons, but you're building up a congregation, a group out there, multiple groups out there that eventually are gonna pledge.
Yes. So that is what your brochures will say. That is what many people will feel, and even the best of us alongside. The only reason I absolutely agree with you, but as you enter these conversations, you got to be honest about that. But it's sacrificing that doesn't feel like sacrificing. We all know what that is. When we've doubled our pledge to something we care about, that on what levels of sacrifice, but then it just didn't feel like it because we gave to what we really care about, right? So it's sharing meaningfully. Does that get at what you're? I mean, it's really that simple, you know. And eventually, there's a short-term and long-term piece here. Again, I would argue that if you believe that small congregations or fellowships have great potential, which I do, but can't quite get the resources to get momentum going, then sort of supporting those, giving those resources for a period of time will help them blossom and get them going. If you believe that, it's a leap of faith. If you really believe that, this works.
I have seen too that the multi-site models seem to work pretty well with some committed lay leaders who help fill in that gap, that the resources go out to the branch or a branch that later becomes a campus. And there are some people who are experienced in the existing congregation who go to the other site and help build that momentum, and also build momentum in their own congregation to prepare people to not have their minister in the pulpit as much, so that the minister can go to the other site and be in the pulpit. And by the time they get to that point, there's so much enthusiasm that it feels like an investment and not a sacrifice.
Thank you for bringing that up. We weren't able to get that sophistication in here, but you kind of smelled it when I talked about coaching, using some of the freed up resources to do coaching and then equipped lay leadership. That is what you see in certainly the branch models too, but it gives a chance to identify some lay leaders who have gifts of the preaching, teaching, small group leading, and really have the ministers empower them, coach them to where they can do that for satellites. And that's what evangelicals did. Most of those guys and gals were car salesmen. They were. Yeah. The car salesmen had one person from theological school who knew what they were doing, coached them, and went out there and grew a ton of churches.
Do you think, given our congregational polity, given our, I will say it kindly, that Unitarians don't follow well, usually, you know, do you find that there's a particular amount of resistance to these sort of things, especially in a merger type situation? And how do you count, I mean, all this stuff that you've said counters that, but there's a fear that goes with that. You know, there's a we're going to lose our identity, even if we're not really losing our staff, even if we're not really losing our name. You know, we're going to subsume ourselves, especially if it's a big church, small church thing. You know, how do you counter that? You know, with love and with, hey, this is really a good idea. You know, what's a good way to do that without freaking people out, I guess is the
right. Well, first of all, you have the boards over to your house and you feed them really well. Actually, that was part of it. But in the seriousness, part of what was, I'll say some things about what make it hard, but that I threw that out. That's not a total joke. How do you overcome that is relationality. You know, when people are talking in the hypothetical about that church, and that church will take us over, or we will lose, you know, the conversation becomes entirely different when you're sitting across people who you actually start to know and care about, and all of a sudden you get excited about what you can do. That it just changes it. So that's one answer. I would say though that from the beginning, that what we're seeing is whether it's large and mid-sized or different size churches or similar size, that fear of losing identity is huge. That is the first. You have to address that to minimize that or tell people that that's not a real concern. Yeah. You're done. You're done at the beginning. So it's not just different sizes. It's all over. You know, so it makes sense. Which is why I really think this yoked model might be the one that our movement starts to hold on to more than the others. Because what it says is, it focuses a little bit more on practicality, which practical you can start to think more. And what unites you at first then is this shared programming and shared staff. And in my own case, what I'll say is, so Canandaigua agreed to do the worship themes and the small group material that First Unitarian had been using. And so there was a little bit of concern of being, well, we're just doing, we're just using your stuff, But two things I think was the experience that I would love. Actually, I don't mean to put folks in Canandaigua on the spot, but please share. It's not quite this simple and idealistic, but what happened when folks started doing that, once they got into the small groups and were once the theme and worship started happening, just by the nature of the worship service being so different, it felt like our theme, because we're embodying it so differently. It was unique there. And also small groups, once you're in small groups, even if you're using that material, the material became the meaningful thing. And nobody was talking about, oh, you know what, this is good, but this was given to us by that. I mean, it just didn't, once you started doing it, it goes away. So that's one thing. You ask people to make a leap of faith and try it on for size. So just try it on for size. But I have one more thing to say, but let me check. Does that fit? I mean, I'm looking at Bob here, who was in a small group with me. I mean, did you feel I was just shoving First Unitarian stuff?
I forgot where it was coming from.
Did everyone hear what Bob said? Yeah, I forgot where it was coming from, because it was ours. It's what it was doing for us, not where it came from.
I would say the fact that even though officially when we started the whole discussion, Scott was officially our very part-time minister, but because he was at First Unitarian and had access to the other ministers there, we started getting sermons not only from Scott but from the other people, and so it meant that we got to know the other ministers there, and it also gave us a whole lot more breadth and depth in sermons than we ever would have been able to have having one minister.
And for those who are like, God, Scott's back again. Thank God we get that other one next week. Does that help?
It does, thank you.
Oh, one thing I was going to say, we just don't have time to go into it today. What became, I would argue, well, it wasn't so bad in the situation I was in, but can become equally, if not surprisingly, more of a challenge than the loss of identity is policy governance. It's for smaller congregations who don't want to have anything to do with policy governance, or who've been told policy governance is not a fit for your size congregation. To do multi-site, all the congregations have to buy under policy governance. There's no way, well, I'm sure there's other, in my experience, to do it effectively. Okay, and different versions. We all embody policy governance similarly, but the crucial thing is, unless you give unless the boards, two separate boards, empower a singular point between the staff and the governance, the level of complexity and creativity it takes to oversee a whole staff serving 2 or 3 congregations. I mean, you're deploying staff differently every month. Yeah. You have to improvise. You can't do that if you have to wait for another board meeting every month to make another decision. I mean, you have to kind of have that policy governance piece, trusting and empowering a singular minister to be the supervisor over all the other staff. That, frankly, can be hard for some of our congregations to get used to.
I was just curious, if we're talking about potentially 2 small churches, or 2 or 3, like that are really on that small level, and it is 1 staff or maybe 2 staff, is that more like the pastoral model, or is it still policy?
Again, this is just my opinion, but it's still you have to have some version of policy governance.
You're talking 2 different things.
Oh, did I misunderstand?
Yeah, because she said pastoral church, and of course that's talking about the type of church you have at the level of membership. small church is gonna be pastoral, because you don't get program church till about 150, 200 members.
Right, but I'm
So-
saying most people do not talk about policy governance
Until
until
they
they're
hit
ready.
that level.
And I'm saying policy governance for all sizes.
And let me just second that. I keep seeing this policy governance of big churches, but I was a library. And small public libraries have run with policy governance forever. You know, one staff, and you know, for the lot of the nonprofit sector, it's just that's what you do.
Yeah.
The board sets policy and empowers the staff to carry it out within limits, and it works for a one employee something or a.
Yep. So, and I'm gonna, this is one of the things, if we had all day together, this is a crucial thing, because how different sized churches embody policy governance, it's a whole nother section that we've developed to talk about that, because it's different. I mean, you have to embody it differently. But again, it's just that crucial piece. You need to empower somebody who has a responsibility to be able to creatively run a very flexible staff team, to be able to deploy them. I mean, just like Lynn was saying, the next week this other minister came, and the next week that, and then all of a sudden this other person was pulled in. Well, somebody's got to manage all that. And when you see an opportunity to be able to relationally connect across the different congregations, you have to be able to have your staff do that.
We also don't have policy governance across the board either, because we still have our own board, and we still have our own building and grounds person. So the board is responsible for certain things. It's the programming that's under the policy governance.
Yeah, see, this is why we didn't have time to go into it, but see, that's one of the tweaks you can make, is you modify policy governance to apply to certain parts. I was very happy to not demand a policy governance control over building and grounds. Bob did wonderfully. Okay, so let's bracket that, just because on our time, we only have about, what, about 10, 15 minutes left? I think?
No, actually, we have
7 minutes left, okay. So, other questions, and then maybe 2 more questions that are pressing, and then we want to end today with, say, where we can go from here and other resources.
Well, for New England, it looks to me like buildings and grounds is the sticking point. If you get policy governance separated, not responsible for buildings and grounds, you take away a big problem in New England.
Yeah, whole big conversation. Bigger problem. Whole big conversation. Actually, I think New England has been struggling for years. This is a model where I hope I can come back in 2 years and we can, I mean, I really, not to be grandiose, I think this is the chance to transform what's happening in New England. You know, especially in churches that are super, super close. A couple other questions that we haven't got at that.
I'm just really excited to have a name for this, because I'm the DA at First U in Syracuse, and we have been collaborating with Maine Memorial for the last 3 years with our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. And the other DRE and I work hand in hand, and we run our programming together, and the kids move from church to church, 1 month at one church and 1 month at the other church, and we pull adults from both of the churches to run those programs, and now we've started doing that with our adult RE programming as well. And I'm excited to have a name for what we've been doing that was just organic and made sense. We're only 2 miles from each other.
It makes sense for all of us. And again, if we had more time, there's other levels of this you can start to apply the idea. This is different than just, hey, let's get together for a pulpit swap every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, let's together to do the Pride Parade. Hey, let's have our youth group do an overnight. This is different. This is integrating them at a level where you have shared resources to free
This is
up.
like cluster work on steroids.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can start small. That's what thank you for that, because I think it highlights as a great note to kind of lift up at the end. You can start big but small, right? It's bigger than just that shared doing the joint Pride Parade. But you don't have to swallow the whole thing. You could do it just with your adult ed program. I mean, imagine if First Unitarian, just the 2 churches in Syracuse, just said all of our adult programming is going to be absolutely shared. We hire one person to minister adult ed programming to do it across the board, and we all just kind of do it together. That you could do that. Any other question? Okay.
this is sort of a comic relief, but it's really true. At one time, churches of a different denomination, inner city churches in Niagara Falls, we tried to get together. And it was a Baptist minister that was holding it. And I was thinking we were gonna go to do things like get people, the same people to cut the grass and to buy our office supplies together and maybe share the church secretary once in the morning and once in the afternoon. I thought this was gonna be great. And we got there and he had a box full of these rubber toys that he told each of us to take. And it wasn't until after we sat down that we realized we were all holding cows and they were the sacred cows that we wouldn't give up. It was real, and so I would think you might be able to get that into your message.
Steal it. Let's steal it.
Well, I thought it was very clever.
I know.
Oh, believe me, I had so many cool pictures of cows yoked. And Mark and my wife were like, what are you doing?
All right, so what I want to highlight is next steps. We want you to know clearly that you're not on your own. And please, these are authorized rumors. Share this with other people who you think know this. So what we've first done is, one of the first things I did when I came as Director of Congregational Life is I put together a cross-regional multi-site midwifing team that has 1 to 2 staff members from every region in our country that are collaboratively working, been working for 4 months now. 4 months now, we're going to be in place, and we're developing comprehensive approaches to supporting, to midwifing multi-site across our country. You should have in your resource packet, did everybody get a packet? Mm-hmm. Okay, what you have here is, this was a vision. Now we kept this, this isn't our study paper, this isn't our research, but we did when we started, we sketched out a vision of multi-site. So what you have here is that vision of that midwifing multi-site team. Then you also have who that is. So within your region, who your contact person is. This beautiful man here is your contact person. So Mark, but again, what I want to highlight is Mark is your link. Yes, he's going to be your resource and a source of expertise, but he's also a resource and a source to a wider whole network of expertise that we're developing. And you get a sense of what our game plan is on the back. Okay, and you can see at the beginning we're starting small. We're starting small, but we have a huge vision. So the last thing I want to say is, as Unitarian Universalists, to the degree, this strategy I think has huge potential for us, but it can transform who we are. Because in order to get multiple ministers in teams serving multiple congregations, it's going to impact how our theological schools operate. It's going to impact how the search process operates. We envision a day where you enter the search process as a team. And first question you have to answer is, are you looking for a solo church, or are you looking for churches that are networked? I mean, that's the vision we have 5-10 years down the road of where this can take us and how we're going to have to adapt to do that. And we are doing that, those infrastructure pieces we're doing on your behalf. So whenever you start to find you have the energy, we're here to help. Is there anything, Mark, on that list that you would highlight? Maybe the innovative learning circles? We only have 1 minute, but
the Facebook and innovative learning circles.
Can you speak to that real quick?
Well, we're setting up. There's a general Facebook page now on multisite that anyone can go to, and then we're gonna create a closed Facebook page for congregations that are getting involved in multi-site options.
And that's on here. Number 4 has the link to the open Facebook page.
Yep. And the other one is we're gonna start a series of innovative learning circles where congregations that are either already involved or are interested in becoming involved will meet virtually on a regular basis, either 2 times a month or once a month for a period of 9 to 12 months, and talk about what's happening and what they want to do. And as they begin, hopefully, to move into more dynamic interactions with other congregations, that they use the Innovative Learning Circle to share with each other. So it's almost like a small group ministry learning group for people that are really interested in getting involved in this.
But again, the goal, if for instance you say, well, I don't even know, my congregations haven't even talked. But if you're a lay leader or a minister who just I just want to think about this some more and find if it's a possibility, these learning circles are made up of potentials, maybe I will, maybe I won't folks, and existing folks. So it's a great circle to be able to have that dialogue.
So contact me if you are interested. It's mbernstein, BERNSTIN @UUA.org.
And again, we're both here. Anything when you read through these, if anything else sparks your interest on here, talk to us. If you're interested in having Mark and or I come to your congregation to talk with you personally, if you're, well, I'm going to say if you're a minister, because do this through your professional leadership. But if you want me to come and talk to a smaller group just to start brainstorming, or we're willing to do, maybe pull a few congregations together and do a more in-depth program like this for you as well.